morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar about water less, ways to use less water in your landscape. First, a few housekeeping pieces for this webinar. Everyone will be on mute throughout the presentation, but I do hope that you will ask some questions. Feel free to enter those into the question box as those ideas or thoughts come to you. That would be wonderful. Then we have some question and answer time at the very end of the presentation. And if I do not get to all of the questions during the time for this webinar, I will email you directly with the answer to those questions. Another piece is that there will be polls throughout the webinar. I hope that you will participate in those polls. They'll help me to gauge your understanding of your irrigation system and with designing how we can move forward and other ways that we might be able to save water in our landscapes. So first off, I would like to thank you all for joining us for this webinar today. A little background, if you are not familiar with the St. Johns River Water Management District, if you found this webinar through other ways than our newsletter or previously attending webinars, we are one of the 5 water management districts in the state of Florida. And it is our mission to ensure that we have enough water for us now and into the future. And we also want to make sure that our natural systems have the water that they need as well. And so in order to do that, we have 4 core missions that everything that we do falls under one of these 4 core missions. Those are water supply, flood protection, water quality, and natural systems. If you're interested in any of these and learning more about each individual core mission, our June webinar series had a different core mission each week as its theme. You can access the recordings of those webinars on our website, www.sjrwmd.com, and I hope that you will take a look at those if you have any questions about our core missions. So when we think about outdoor irrigation, the need to conserve water here in Florida, a lot of people come to me with the question of, why is it important to conserve water here in Florida? We live in a state where we get over 52 inches of rain a year. We're surrounded on 3 sides by water. We have the greatest concentration of freshwater springs. We have over 10 million acres of wetlands, an abundance of rivers and lakes, and ultimately, it is the amount of water that we have in this state and the fact that not all of the water in our state is in a usable form that makes water conservation so important. So if you're thinking about water conservation, how we may impact our water sources, it's important to understand where we get our water. So if we think about the areas that we most frequently come in contact with, so our landscapes, the surface of our ground, we think about our rivers and our lakes and maybe our wetlands. But as we start digging down into the ground, we have those surface sands. Those will cover the whole state of Florida. In some areas, we have a superficial aquifer system. So that layer of aquifer or area that is able to hold water and allow water to move through it. And those are created where there are clay layers underneath or some sort of hard material. Sometimes they're more compact rock than our limestone. But though in those areas, you may have a superficial well or a shallow well that you use for irrigation. And those are not connected to the same source that our drinking water, our utility water, our deeper wells are going to come from. And that is coming from the Floridan aquifer system. And it is one of the largest, most productive aquifer systems in the world because it covers all of Florida. It goes up into South Carolina, across southern Georgia, and a little bit over into Alabama. And this aquifer system is made out of limestone. And it is where our springs come from. And so that's why we call our springs our window to our aquifer system. If we think about the fact that we are getting our water from the Floridan aquifer and springs are getting their water from the Floridan aquifer, you may be thinking, well, where is that water in the Floridan aquifer coming from? And it is coming from rainfall. So it's really important that we do get 52 inches of rain a year on average, because that rainfall in those recharge areas, so those areas where we don't have that clay, is really important. That provides water into the Floridan aquifer systems. That's why sometimes we'll see that spring discharges become higher after large rainfalls over time. But this is that water cycle in Florida with our rains recharging the aquifer and then our springs flowing out of the aquifer into our rivers and our lakes. But where do we come about in this system? And that is that we utilize water from the aquifer, and our construction, our neighborhoods, our businesses, we are creating more impervious surface. So water, places that water isn't able to make it down into the ground and move underground. So we create more runoff. So we'll have a little bit of a discussion about how that changes the way water is moving in our ecosystems. So at the district, if we are making sure that we understand how water is being used and how it's going to be available into the future, it's important to understand where is that water getting used. And so for residential water use, if you have an in-ground irrigation system, about half of your water gets utilized outside. And there have been some studies done by the EPA WaterSense that have shown that as much as 50% of that water that's getting used outside is just being wasted. It's not actually making its way into the plants, either through over application and creating runoff, or through leaks or those type of things. So it's really important to address this outdoor potential for water conservation. So with that in mind, I have a poll I would like to have everyone participate in this. And let me know, what is your satisfaction with your landscape? You can select as many of these as you would like. So does it look nice, but you want to use less water? You feel like it looks nice, but the rain is the only way that it's getting watered. You'd like it to look better and use less water. You'd like to have a variety of plants in it. You want to have more, you have a lot of birds and pollinators that are utilizing your yard. So what is your description of your landscape? I'll keep it open for just another second. And let's see what those results are. So a whole lot of folks that like the way that it looks and are utilizing rain to satisfy its needs. A lot of folks that love the birds and pollinators that it attracts. And I think that is one of the best ways that we can think about our yards and think about the ways that we can conserve yards and make even small ecosystems in our backyards to provide habitat for bees, birds, pollinators. And then a good number of folks that would like for their landscape to use less water. So hopefully by the end of today, you will have a good number of ways that you're able to use less water outside. So I challenge you to start thinking about your irrigation system if you have one. And in just a second, I'm going to do a quick poll of how you have your irrigation schedule set if you have an irrigation system. But I hope that you'll start thinking about your irrigation as a way to supplement the rainfall that we get here in Florida. Again, we get 15 inches of rain a year on average. All of that rain does not fall evenly throughout the year. So my background is in soil and water science and in plant ecosystems. So I really love looking at graphs. And so whenever I talk about the plant needs for water and how much water plants are going to evapotranspirate, I always think about, well, what is the amount of rain that's coming down? And so I created this graph to show us that in the summer, so in June, July, August, and September, during our rainy season, that evapotranspiration rate, so the amount of water that the plants would pull up out of the ground and utilize is being met by rainfall. So during those seasons, it's really important that we're paying attention to the weather, that we're seeing how much it's rained, and thinking about utilizing our irrigation just in those times of the rainfall not meeting our plants' needs. So really focusing on that March, April, May as plants are starting to grow and it's starting to get a lot warmer. During the summer, our plants need, our grass especially, other types of plants are going to utilize less water, need only 3/4 of an inch of rain every 3 to 4 days. So those afternoon thunderstorms that come through will easily drop that very quickly. So it's important to consider when is that rain falling, and how are you able to supplement your plants with your irrigation system rather than solely depending on it. So some of these water conserving landscapes they're all going to look very different. So if you live in an older, more established neighborhood, maybe you have some of those larger trees that provide shade for your landscape. Maybe you're battling with your shade to get grass to stay growing in those areas, because so many of our grass species do not tolerate a high amount of shade. But don't think of that shade as a problem. Think of it as a helpful opportunity to reduce that evaporation from your landscapes. So that shade does a really nice job of helping the soil to stay moist. So if you live in an older, more established neighborhood with a greater amount of trees, maybe you can create more areas of mulch with beds so that you aren't having to have that high volume irrigation. That's a consideration. And none of these ideas do I suggest saying, I'm going to go out and transform my entire landscape this weekend. It is a long weekend for most of us, so there is more opportunity, but take it in small bites if you're looking to change some of the landscape in your yards. Take small areas. In my yard, we are working on redoing the backyard, and so we've been doing irrigation and have been sectioning off different areas of even just the backyard and adding a pollinator garden last summer. So those are just some of the ways that you can start thinking about how your yard might look a little bit different. If you're in a newer neighborhood, maybe you look at the area of high volume irrigation of those areas with the grass and say, well, are there areas in between the sidewalk and the grass that maybe aren't doing as well, and maybe I could create a small little bed with some mulch and some flowers. Those are also really great ideas and great ways to decrease the irrigation. So much of our plant fight that we may have is if we have an idea of what plant we want in our front yard, but that plant isn't happy because it has the wrong kind of soils, it has the wrong conditions for it to grow, it will not grow there no matter how much we really want it to. So that is one important consideration. And so that is what I mean when I start talking about plant considerations. So thinking about both your desires for what the aesthetics of your landscape is to be. And so are you thinking you want an area with grass to be able to recreate on, to have picnics, to have dogs on that grass turf area? Do you want varying heights of plants like the one on the left? Those shrubs can be irrigated with micro irrigation. So it's going to be a different type of irrigation that can be utilized. And so you can have a lot of water savings with the design of your landscape. It's really important that you think about the needs, though, of those plants. So what kind of soil do you have in the area that you're wanting to plant that plant? Some of those conditions that you want to make sure you're thinking about for those plants are pH, the soil type. So is it a really sandy soil? Is it a loam? Do you have some clays? There are a few areas in Florida that actually will hold a lot more water, and so you want to make sure you have the right kind of plant going in those soils, because you will not allow, or those other plants that don't like those kind of conditions won't be able to survive and thrive. Also, sun considerations. Are you trying to plant a plant that really likes shade in a full sun area? And so all of these considerations will be described on plant tags, so, or on the plant descriptions of what kind of soil they want, what kind of sunlight regime they like, and how much water they need. That's another consideration that you want to think about when you're planning your landscape. So there are opportunities to have a landscape that's very varied, that provides habitat, potentially food for our birds and our butterflies. The beautyberry is a great example of something that provides food for birds in the fall and winter. So that's just one way that we can think about the plants that we're putting in our landscape. So if we have grass in our yard and we're wanting to be able to decrease how much we are irrigating that grass, there are a couple of ways that we can make that grass more resilient. So a couple of things are, plants with deeper roots are going to be more drought tolerant, so they're not going to need as much water as plants with shorter roots. So that picture in the middle shows a really nice difference between grass that gets watered more deeply, and so those roots grow down into the soil much deeper because they're seeking out that water. But it also shows the importance of the height at which you mow your grass. If you have St. Augustine grass and you are mowing it very short, sometimes you hear that called scalping, that can cause those roots of your grass to also become very short. And then that will stress it out because it's not able to take up as much water throughout the drier periods. So the graphic on the side shows the height that you should mow your grasses. You also want to make sure that the mower blades are sharp so that it decreases the amount of stress on the grass and is able to handle longer periods in between water. So when we're thinking about irrigation, there are three things that are crucial to having an efficient system. Those are efficient design. So we'll talk about what does it mean to have an efficient design. We'll talk about frequent maintenance, making sure that you're checking to see that your system is working properly and how to go about that maintenance. And then proper scheduling. Again, we want to reduce how much of that water is wasted, and proper scheduling of irrigation can greatly reduce that wasted water. So let's talk about efficient design first. So one of the things when we're thinking about our irrigation system is what kind of sprinkler system do we have? One of those considerations are this actual sprinkler body. So making sure that your sprinkler heads pop up above the grass. So if you have rotators or rotors or even spray heads that are pop-up variety, you want to make sure that it pops up over that grass. And so we have another nice graphic that shows if you have St. Augustine or Bahia, you're going to want those 6-inch bodies so that you're sure to clear the top of those that grass. Because if it's not popping up over the grass, then you're not going to get an even coverage, and it's really going to just water right around that head. So it's a really good consideration to make sure that you have the right kind of body. And you want to make sure with those proper sprinkler bodies that you're getting good head-to-head coverage. And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. So what are the different types of sprinkler heads that might be a part of that efficient design? So the first type that we're going to talk about are sprays. So these are going to be in a single fixed position, and they're going to have a 5 to 15 foot throw. So they're going to be in a smaller area. You may frequently see these being utilized to irrigate small areas of grass, and sometimes they're utilized in newer construction to irrigate beds and those type of areas, but they're going to be much smaller areas that are irrigated with these. Rotors are able to apply at a slower rate and they have a much larger throw. So they're going to spread that water a lot further. So large areas are going to use rotors typically. And then the one that is typically more water efficient applies that water at a much slower rate at 0.6 inches an hour, but it is able to irrigate small areas. In fact, there are some that are designed so that they irrigate in a square. So those are really nice for those islands of grass where you may be trying to irrigate. And they also have them, if you are purchasing the right kind, you always want to check your specifications, but that can irrigate up to 35 feet. So you want to know what you're buying and what your application is. So always have that in the back of your head. When you're thinking about what type of sprinkler heads you may have or may want, it is important to understand how your zones in your yard are laid out. So you want to run each of your zones independently so you see what type of spray heads or sprinkler heads are on each zone. And you want to make sure that you are avoiding having sprays and rotors together. If you find that you have sprays and rotors together, there are a couple of things you can do. But you may be saying first, well, why would it matter if I have sprays and rotors together? And ultimately, it is because you'll utilize much more water. Remember, sprays apply water at a much greater intensity, so that at 1/2 inch or 1.5 inches every hour, where rotors are slower. So after 20 minutes, you've gotten your 1/2 inch goal. The rotors, though, need 45 minutes to get that 1/2 inch, and we have over applied with our sprays. So it's really important to have one kind of spray heads on each zone. So you could convert those by installing a new zone. You'd want to have an irrigation consultant come in, most likely to do that. You may be able to change out those spray heads to rotary nozzles. That may give you more even application, but you want to really check and understand how your irrigation system is designed. And so if you have some of these considerations, hiring an irrigation consultant is very helpful. Another way to get efficient design is microirrigation. So microirrigation does a fabulous job of applying that water right to the roots. It decreases the opportunity for it to be lost through evaporation, and it applies a much slower rate. So there are several different kinds of microirrigation. Here we have just a few. So we have the tube, we have the drip, and then you also can get bubblers for tree irrigation. The next part of that trifecta was maintenance. So we understand what design would mean. What does maintenance look like? Quarterly, you should run your irrigation system to identify if you have any broken heads, any geysers like that one in the middle. You may or may not be able to find areas of pipe where you have leaks. We were working on our irrigation system and found that pipe that's in the top picture that has some roots growing into the line because we were working on replacing irrigation. So, but if you do notice pooling water, it is important to investigate where is that water coming from. And then are your heads popping up properly and returning into the ground appropriately? And then if you're having issues with when the system turns off, all of that water draining out, you could install pressure regulated spray bodies so that that's not occurring. You also want to ensure when you're running your system that you're not getting misting. So misting can cause a lot of water to spray, and it can be an indication that the pressure has changed or is too high in your system. So there are multiple ways that you can regulate that pressure. You also, during your maintenance, want to make sure to adjust the angle at which your spray head is putting out water and the throw of it so that you're not creating lots of runoff opportunity like in that bottom picture. And then you also want to adjust how far your irrigation is putting that water so that it's applying it all to the grass rather than to the concrete around. And this is important so that all of that water is being utilized by the grass. Scheduling. What is the appropriate schedule to make sure that we are not wasting water? So this chart is on our website. it is a great place to go for suggested efficiency of your controllers. One of the best ways to know how much water your system is putting down and that it's meeting the demands of your yard is to do our tuna can test method. And so that's one of the other tools that's on our website. There's a video and a worksheet. We do have year-round watering restrictions within the St. Johns River Water Management District. And so during the summer, you don't want to be watering more than 2 days of a week. But don't think of that as prescriptive. If it's projected to rain, or if it has already rained, turn off your system and let the rain have given the plants all the water that they need. That brings us into our rainfall shut-off devices. And by Florida statute, all in-ground irrigation systems need to have a rainfall shut-off device. And these shut-off devices need to be wired into the controller so that they will override the system if enough rain has fallen. Unfortunately, these do not survive very long with our Florida heat and wetness, and so it is important to check these frequently. A study done by UF found that they lasted about 2 to 5 years. So if you're depending on these solely, you might want to check them monthly to make sure they're working. So the best way to control your timer is to control it manually. Always want to watch the weather and wait to water. That is our summer campaign for our Water Less campaign. And make sure you're thinking about it properly. Ways that you can continue to reduce water use is changing it, capping heads, really reducing how much of that high volume irrigation you have in areas that you may have plants that are established and not needing that frequent irrigation. So if you're looking at opportunities for new plants, our WaterWise database is a fabulous place to go for that. There are some wonderful certifications. So the Florida Water Star, Florida Landscape, and the FGBC have landscape certifications that are a fabulous way to make sure that your landscape is being the most water efficient and water quality considerate. And you can get a certification, so you could get a nice plaque to display in your landscape. And ultimately, it is important that we're doing this so that we have a reduced amount of wasted water from our aquifer, being pulled from our aquifer, really reducing how much water we're using. But irrigation can also be a source of nutrient transport, and nutrients can cause algal blooms like those in the middle. We have some really great tools. One thing that I would like to point out is that the Department of Environmental Protection is looking to find landscapes that are needing conversion to being Florida yards. And if you're interested, check out that Flip My Florida Yard to sign up potentially for a yard conversion. So I hope that you have had a great opportunity to learn some new ways that you can save water in your yard. And I'm going to post one more question and see what you all think. So if everybody can go ahead and vote on that. So what is your way that you're going to start watering less in your landscape? Are you going to now adjust your irrigation schedule since we found out how important irrigation schedule is? Maybe looking at converting some sprinkler heads to the rotary style, or to micro if we have established beds, capping heads. Or are you interested in converting to plants that are going to provide more variety of needs? So I'm going to let a few more come in, and please enter any questions you might have so that we can get to those really quickly. So I see a lot of folks now know more about their irrigation schedule and the importance of that, and that a whole lot want to incorporate more plants. Oh, and I had a notification as well that if you're an Alachua County resident, their turf swap program is now looking for participants. I had one other question come in of when is the best time to water? John, the best time is typically going to be early in the morning before there is that great demand for water from your utility system. And it's also best to water early in the morning because that will allow for the plants to get even a little bit more water from the dew, and you're avoiding getting into the middle of the day when the sun starts getting hotter and you start losing a lot more to evaporation. So early in the morning is a great time, but you also want to make sure you do run your system when you're awake. So with that, I don't see any more questions coming in, and we are at 11 o'clock. I really appreciate all of your attention, and feel free to send me any other questions you may have in the next little bit. And I hope that this summer you will water less and watch the weather and wait to water. Hope you all have a great day.